world history students. Today we're going to talk about the British rule in India, but just really quickly, some background about an impossibly old civilization. Um, India is a geographic expression in the time period that we're talking about here, the Age of Empires. It becomes a national expression basically as a result of the influence of the British Empire on the Indian subcontinent. So there's basically two things you need to know about the area that is now modern day India. It has varied in geographic scope over time, and it is a land of ancient religious traditions and many different kinds of religious traditions. So the first thing I want to point out to you is this temple on the left-hand side is a Buddhist temple that is supposedly at the site where the Buddha himself found enlightenment and discovered the Eightfold Path and the concepts of nirvana and kind of cyclical rebirth. And it's not so much that he discovered those paths as that he created a new set of meanings on an even older civilization. So this building here was built in around the year 500 AD, but Hinduism as a religion predated Buddhism by centuries. It's as old as Judaism, which comes from, about 5,000 to 10,000 BC. So old culture. The map on the right shows the largest empire that controlled the Indian subcontinent. And so you can actually see it's labeled Hindustan. If you ever notice on a map, like you can see above it Uzbekistan, the word stan in Arabic basically, or Turkic rather, means land of. So according to the Mughal Empire, which was a Muslim controlled empire, Mughal is a way of saying Mongol. They're not really Mongols, but that's neither here nor there. They looked at the lands of India as the lands of the Hindus. And that changes as more and more Muslims basically are moved to India from the lands that are now modern day Persia, and local Hindus convert to Islam. So India is a country that's got the beginnings of the Hindu religion, the beginnings of the Buddhist religion, a ancient, so about 500 AD, this thing was built on the left. Islam really comes into India around the year 700. So 1,300 years of Islam, 3,000 years of Hinduism, and probably 1,500 years of Buddhism in this one place. The British come in and they effectively unite the subcontinent again, except under their own rule. So, in a lot of ways, what the history of the British Empire in India is wrenching it from its own ancient traditions into a connection with the modern world. So, the modern day nation of India is only a portion of what was the British Indian Empire, kind of the central portion here. What you're looking at on this map, if you remember from our first section in the imperialism unit, you have areas of red which are directly ruled by Great Britain, and then areas of yellow which are indirectly ruled through local nobles and princes and dukes and the like. So native rulers under effective control of the British. So you may remember, and let me go to the next slide to get the focus question, a little bit about India in the context of the US history courses that you've taken, and especially in the context of tea. But before we get there, how did the British Empire come to encompass India, and what impact did its rule have, is your focus question. So, getting back to the tea. If you remember from US History 1, there was a whole kerfuffle about the Boston Tea Party. That tea had to come from somewhere, and it came from the portions of the British Empire that actually could grow tea, including the island of Sri Lanka, which is kind of that teardrop shape on the south end of the Indian subcontinent. And there was a company that had been granted effectively a monopoly on all trade. Really wealthy individuals put up roughly, I think it's, oh gosh, $80 million in modern day money to found what was called the British East India Company. And the short answer to the title of this slide, what role did the British East India Company play in the establishment of British rule in India? They made it happen. So, acquiring tea, that monopoly they acquire from Parliament because of their political influence helps cause the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. And the way this tea was acquired and the other spices and the other resources of India was effectively private mercenary armies paid for by the British East India Company, which again is a privately held company granted special rights by the Queen of England or the King of England, initially at least. The sepoys, who are these Indian soldiers, Incidentally, if you go to Southeast Asia today, police officers are called sepoys, which I think is a really interesting kind of legacy of the colonial era. And they basically, this private army of this private company is able to conquer much of India after the end of the Seven Years' War. So, right prior to the American Revolution, this company expands its private mercenary army, establishes slavery, which already exists in India, but they make it mechanized, tea plantations, and military role in much of India. So, effectively, they made a giant investment in India and they want America to pay for it. Again, American Revolution. It's just amazing how this stuff connects. So the sepoys are treated poorly. They're not ever allowed. They're hired guns, and the Protestant British are arrogant, and they come into this culture that, as I kind of outlined in the beginning, has existed for centuries, thousands of years, and the Indian workers assume that it's possible that they would be disrespected enough to effectively. There's this story that goes around, this rumor that the bullet cases are being greased, so there's a bullet in a like kind of paper case and you pull it out, you put it into your gun. That's how. And so that keeps it from sticking in the barrel. There's a rumor that it's either pig grease or cow grease. Muslims do not eat pork. If it was pig grease, it would be really offensive to them. Many Indians were Muslim. Cows are sacred to the Hindu. If it was cow grease, it would be offensive to the Hindu. um, and so there you basically have the British have treated the Indians poorly enough. It's a company doing this, that there is a uprising called the Sepoy Rebellion, which you've already looked at, that ultimately fails. There's a brutal massacre at Kanpur, which is basically seen by the British public as a sign that this company is not worthwhile. So after 1857, Queen Victoria crowns herself Empress of India, and this new colony that was basically acquired by this private mercenary army in the service of private shareholders is made the crown jewel of the British Empire. So it's effectively kind of a proto capitalism that causes the establishment of British rule in India, extraction of resources, and just like all these other colonies. And then eventually they treat the natives badly enough that the government itself has to take over and direct rule. So there's Queen Victoria herself. She's kind of sitting there. Those are two of her Indian servants. And I just included them because it shows the impact of British rule in India. I'm sorry, British rule, yes. And so part of the way the British ruled is, again, directly. So there's somebody called the Viceroy, and it's kind of just what it sounds like. The Viceroy, it's like the vice president in a sense, except with more power. And they're supposed to be the representative of the Queen. And so a thing to keep in mind is India is considered the personal property of that woman sitting right there. She's a monarch, she's an empress, and there's about 3,500 civil servants. So these are middle class folks. George Orwell, incidentally, who you'll read, I believe, your senior year, was a British civil servant in India, and he saw how brutal the conditions were for the Indian people. That's helped make him anti-authoritarian, pro-democracy. And so you've got British people who rule over 300 million Indians. And so, some become servants, but they're never going to be rulers. Benefits, in a sense, or at least, ultimately modernizing changes for better or for worse. There are railroads built all across the continent. I think I mentioned that in the very first presentation we did here. A very effective postal system. Again, imagine trying to find the addresses of 300 million people. India still doesn't have house numbers on most houses. It's, people are able to get their mail delivered in spite of a lack of what we here in the United States would consider, signage, things like that. Only there's a education system that's developed, universities. There are universities in India that date back to British rule that are very, very good. Medical schools, things like that. There's lots and lots of higher education going on in India, but only about 10% of the population was able to take advantage of this system, while the other 90% are suffering. So there are people that are called apologists that like to argue that British rule was good for India and modernized them. It's really, but if you listen carefully, it's a modern take on the white man's burdened social Darwinistic idea. It's like we can't really know what would have happened if the British didn't conquer India, but we do know what happened because they did. This colony was super profitable, great for Britain, but all of that profit went overseas. There are beautiful buildings in London that were built, like Westminster Abbey or the modern day Parliament. partially off the profits extracted from India. So India's wealth goes to Great Britain and makes Britain wealthier. And that's still true today. Um, Millions of people are put out of work because, just kind of, again, think back to America, the import of British goods puts people who were doing those jobs before out of work. So textiles is always the first thing that blows up when industrialization happens. So local weavers, ancient traditions, gone. The local officials in those indirect colonies just are even more brutal than the British in many cases. Plantation crops replace food crops, and so 30 million Indians starve because instead of food, they're growing cotton in lands where they could grow food. Racism prevents Indians from ever rising in power or feeling dignity, basically compared to their British masters. There are some enlightened Brits who basically, spend enough time in India, they understand they're interacting with human beings, but you get new imports every year who come in with arrogance and social Darwinism and racism, and it really, eventually drives the Indian population against British rule. So the impact on the Indian people was largely negative, I would argue, but it certainly was transformative regardless of how you feel about it. So Indian nationalism comes from basically that top 10% of people who were lucky enough to get an education via the British. So the gentleman in the middle here, you can read the sign. This is Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, rather, who is an attorney. He studies in London. He basically goes to South Africa to try to represent Indian workers that are in South Africa. By the way, the British Empire relied on what they called coolie labor. So, coolie is a racist term for an Indian worker. And even Gandhi, who went to London, studied law, was referred to as a coolie, just a common dirt, eating laborer when he went to South Africa. This is also true in the Americas. So there are British colonies in the Caribbean with large Indian populations. So an island like Jamaica, for example, has various Jamaican curries. That's because of the influence of Hindus who, brought in, other Indian subcontinent inhabitants who brought their foods with them. So if you really, the story of the world is more complicated than just simply, the Caribbean is an isolated area, America is an isolated area, India is an isolated area. So Mahatma Gandhi, he goes from South Africa, where he sees the brutality of these, the British against these Indian workers, promotes nonviolent resistance amongst some of those workers, is successful in improving conditions, and returns to India and joins what's called the Indian National Congress, which is effectively it's a political party. So it's the first political party that is asking for further Indian involvement in the Indian government. And initially they're reformers and ask for, oh, we want to have, acceptance of Indians in the civil service. Eventually, over time, and under the leadership of Gandhi, they start to advocate for full independence. But that won't happen until after World War II. So, what impact did British imperialism have on colonial Indian culture? It is very, very difficult to kind of pin this down. So I want to focus on the two images first. So what you see above is the Indian Festival of Holi. It's the festival of colors. It's a festival of spring. It takes place in our February, and it's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. And people basically take powdered colors and they smear them on themselves and each other, and there's this dust that goes around, and it's a big old party in the streets everywhere. Down below is the Indian Parliament. So the Indian Parliament was built by the British and Indian laborers using Indian architecture combined with European architecture. So it's this interesting combination. It's still the Indian House of Parliament. It's a really unique building because, again, some of the British who were in India had enough respect for Indian culture to try to use some of its elements. However, it wasn't a choice that the Indian people were able to make. So festivals like Holi, I put this image up here because those dyes and those powders used to be all organically produced. They used to be produced from plants and minerals, some of which were poisonous, by the way. Now they're mostly made in factories. So industrialization is the biggest impact on colonial Indian culture and really modern Indian culture. The industrialization of India is able to turn it into a nation that is a net exporter of goods versus a net importer over time. Another issue that, or another factor on Indian culture is Industrialization allows mass printing of literature. So all of a sudden, all these ancient books and tomes are able to be mass reproduced. The Bhagavad Gita, the ancient Hindu kind of holy book, and one of the many holy books, because there's thousands, is reproduced and spread to the West and to the East. Yoga is a discipline that was pretty obscure, and then it was rescued from obscurity by Indian nationalists using the tools the British gave them, including some of those educations, to promote the expression of Indian nationality. And it is obviously very popular today. There's a gentleman, Rabindranath Tagore, and he is kind of a great example of what thinking, educated Indians, spiritual Indians, were able to do under domination. Long story short, his message was peace, love, understanding, freedom from dominating others. And he, that really, that last point is that dominating others is a kind of oppression on the self. And he sends this message abroad, which is just super, super powerful. So nonviolent resistance, don't just, dominate other people. Try to recognize that the light in you sees the light in the other. It's the message that the Indian nationalist tries to send out to the world. And in spite of all of the oppression that the Indian people are facing, their culture is forced to grow and change in a sense. It's a really interesting story, and colonialism and imperialism is really complicated to kind of unwind the different threads from each other. So this would be a great discussion to have in class at some point, and I hope to talk to you guys about this further. Let's get this done.